Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Roy Smith analyzes corn and soybean markets after delays in planting and a week before big USDA reports. Al Dutcher looks at the outlook for heat and rainfall during summer months. We'll talk with Stan Garbitz about how the Nebraska Department of Ag is establishing relationships around the world to promote Nebraska agricultural trade. And Bruce Johnson explains the value of center pivot irrigation in Nebraska. Roy Smith is our marketing analyst this week. With 100% of its corn emerged and 99% of its soybean planted, Nebraska is well ahead of the national averages. The latest USDA crop progress report shows U.S. soybean planting is tied for the third slowest since 1995. Only Michigan is finished with its soybean crop, and Iowa has only put in 3/4 of its beans. When we talked Wednesday afternoon, I asked Roy for his opinion on how delayed planting could affect corn and soybean markets.
My experience in 40-some years of farming is that cold weather and excess moisture during planting time very rarely has a lasting effect on the markets. It'll have some effect when it's going on. We saw that for instance, in 1984, but usually by the time we get to the middle, late summer, the market has discounted all of that, and so, it probably, if we get a big rally anytime during this time period or prior, it's a good time to be making some sales.
Give me an update on what you've done here on your farm for corn and beans.
Right now, as of middle of June, I'm sold out of everything. I sold the last little bit of gambling corn this week, and about a month ago sold out of my soybeans that I had in commercial storage. So my general rule of thumb is I don't want to own any grain going into the 4th of July weekend, and that's just a few days ahead here. And with the strong markets we've had this week, I just thought it was a good chance to get that done.
We saw a supply and demand report come out last week, and we'll see another report in a week here. But what are you seeing on the charts today? As we talk on Wednesday afternoon, it was a strong close for corn and beans, but what are the charts indicating to you?
It was a really good day on Wednesday for corn and beans both, and we've got some gaps on the price charts above the market where the market closed last Wednesday, and so I look at those gaps as kind of a benchmark or kind of a ladder. If you haven't got anything sold, where that gap is, where there wasn't any trading back in February, that would be a good time to put some orders in and hope that you can get some sales made. Especially if you're going to go to the elevator at harvest time with it. If you got plenty of storage at home and you don't mind taking the risk, we still have an awfully wide basis for new crops. So, I guess I would be inclined under those conditions to be very conservative in my sales.
Just a little bit further, how good is basis here?
The basis right now is just dynamite. It's as good as it's ever been, and it seems to be holding there, and that's a sign that tightness of supply in the old crop. It's this basis thing is hard to gauge because we saw the elevators this last week change their bids from August futures to November futures, and then also in corn and beans both. Actually, we saw jumping around of the bid based on what contract they're using. And of course there's a wide disparity in the price between July and August, or between July and November, and so when you see that, then you have to plug that into your formula, and it makes the calculations really difficult.
We have a few big reports coming out next week, not only on planted acres where we might see a shift. I think the popular opinion is that we'll see a shift in both downward, but also in grain stocks. Do you have any advice on what to do leading up to maybe after the report as well?
I guess, you know, my feeling is that whatever you're going to do, you need to do it before the report comes out. Those reports have a tendency to be bearish and to be depressing to the market for a while. Now the last report that came out was bearish for a few days, and then we saw the market on Wednesday of this week, like we talked, that jumped 20 cents on corn, and so the market ignored that report after a few days and started bidding on what the market thinks the supply is going to be, and right now the supply is very tight and will be until the new crop becomes available.
Our market analyst next week will be Ron Plain. We'll also talk with John Moret after the USDA reports for grain stocks and planted acres are released on Friday afternoon. That interview will be available on the Market Journal website and Facebook page. Another portion of southeast Nebraska has exited drought conditions, according to the latest UNL drought monitor. Just less than 8% of the state is now in no drought, all of that in the southeast corner. With summer beginning Friday the 21st, we thought it'd be a good time to talk with Al Dutcher to see what the coming months have in store and how this year's patterns compare to 2012.
Well, basically 2012, we broke dormancy as we got into the early part of March. We never looked back. We were setting all kinds of records early in the spring. Basically, we had some brief precipitation periods there in middle part of April, early part of May, and then we basically shut off the precipitation. And of course, when you add that extra month of heat, the water balance equation really got screwed up a little bit as we shifted all the demand forward, and we basically ran out of water. This year we kind of mimicked the same pattern in the fall. Through this winter we started to pick up a few precipitation events. Then we've seen this rather inclement weather build in during April and May, cause some considerable planting delay issues. So kind of the polar opposite of last year in terms of temperatures. Things are delayed about anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 weeks in comparison to normal. And we've been exceptionally wet. In fact, if you look at most locations in eastern Nebraska for the true spring period, which is defined as March, April, May, top 10 coldest, and we were in the top third in terms of wettest. However, the last couple of weeks things have started to dry out, and it is a little bit concerning as we go forward in time.
Yeah, there's a big pocket from southeast Nebraska that has no drought conditions whatsoever, but is that something that continues, and does it continue in the western half where there is still that drought condition going on?
There is still that drought condition. A lot of that is a reflection not only hydrological features, but it's also a function of a lot of the precipitation was insufficient to get that profile filled up to where it normally should have been. And talking to some of my colleagues as we get prepared for next week's Climate Assessment Response Committee meeting, and this is with the National Weather Service people, there's a real good feeling that we're probably going to see an extended period of hot and dry conditions. And so I would expect—
Across the entire state?
Across the entire state. And I would expect that we will see some of these pockets of dryness start to move back into eastern Nebraska. Whether or not we'll replace them within drought in the next couple of weeks, I'd be highly suspicious of that, but abnormally dry conditions are likely to invade. You know, if this thing persists on for more than a couple more weeks, now we're going to start to get concerned because we'll rapidly deplete that soil moisture as this corn crop itself starts to get into the rapid growth stage. As it's getting in around the 8th, 10 leaf stage, it's going to really start to require a lot of water. Anything in the dryland environment is going to extract that out rather dramatically, and all of a sudden we're back in the same boat that we were as we were seeing the same point last year.
How far east does that extend? Iowa, Illinois there, and if you look at precipitation alone, in great shape to start off with if there's a crop that gets in the ground, but does that continue there?
Well, I think that they would be on the front side of that periphery of the ridge that's building in, and so they would probably see periodic thunderstorm activity. They're so far behind, I just don't know whether or not this drying conditions are going to be beneficial to them. If that crop does start to get in, especially the corn crop, we're going to be facing freeze problems all the way through this fall. There's going to be a lot of people worried about that with the delays that they have. For us, I think drought is the thing that we need to pay attention to, and irrigation is going to really ramp up here, and a lot of water demand is going to start to filter in here in the next couple of weeks.
I'll return towards the end of the show with this week's weather forecast. The United Nations has made a revision to its world populations estimate. By 2050, the UN now expects 9.6 billion people will live on Earth. That's an increase from the previous forecast. The world's current population of 7.2 billion people is projected to rise to 8.1 billion by 2025. India is also expected to surpass China as the world's largest country by 2028. Nearly a year ago, we were in China to see how the world's most populous country leaned on other nations to meet its growing food needs. While China has become the major player when it comes to soybean imports, agricultural goods from Nebraska are exported all over the world. We recently sat down with Stan Garbitz from the Nebraska Department of Ag to take a look at a few of his recent international trips, including his latest to Turkey.
We were invited by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to join on one of their agriculture trade missions. It was headed by Deputy Secretary of Ag Michael Skuse, and it was a fantastic trip. What they did was gave us an opportunity to look at a market that we haven't really looked at very much. People don't hear much about Turkey. Traditionally, that's been, over the years, off and on market for our dry edible beans. So we took our companies from Nebraska, a representative from the Nebraska Dry Bean Commission, and went, and it was just excellent. We had an opportunity to see some of our beans in the market. They also import a lot of hides. They have a large tanning operation, and so we got to see a little bit more of that, and we got to realize that we've got a potential big problem there as far as our grain exports there.
Such as?
They just passed a law that said that they will now have zero tolerance for GMOs. And I don't know much about the science other than the fact that when you have a GMO product and it comes in contact with a non-GMO product, it will absorb some of the stuff. And so when a test would come by, it would show a very minute part, but it would show some GMO properties.
Sure.
So this could be potentially a big issue, and we're going to be working with USDA and some other people and see if we can resolve that. The grain traders there who we met with while we were there, Cargill, Bunge, all that have presence here in Nebraska, are very concerned about it. So we're going to be working with them to see if there's some way we can help that.
You're also doing some work in Japan, reintroducing a product from Cargill, a Spencer beef. Explain to me kind of how that trip went. Greg Iboss, some other representatives from Nebraska were there. Talk to me about that trip.
Yes, Greg went over there with the Cargill people, and what Spencer beef was a product that was doing very, very well in Japan prior to the BSE issue. And even after the BSE issue was somewhat resolved, they still only allowed beef from cattle under 20 months. We had an issue trying to get enough of that, so they didn't want to reintroduce that Spencer product until they had the quantity that they needed. Once in February, they lifted that up to 30 months. Then Cargill decided they were going to reintroduce it. The Spencer beef product is a higher end beef product only produced in the Schuyler, Nebraska plant. And so we were very excited about that. And so we worked with them. We did two very large events, both in Tokyo and Osaka, that Greg attended to help promote, help reintroduce, get our importers, our distributors excited about it again. Obviously, we served the product there. It went over very, very well, and we're looking for that product to gain hold very quickly in the very near future.
Tell me about Singapore, the JBS product that you're working with there.
JBS has a product they call 1855, another premium product. It's produced in Grand Island only, and they've done very, very well in Hong Kong. And here again, Singapore has gradually been reopening the market for our beef. And so we worked with one of the largest importers there and did several events over the course of a couple days to reintroduce that product to the public. Here again, that went over very, very well. People really do like U.S. Nebraska product, and when they get the best of the best, they're very excited.
Well, speaking of, you have some delegates coming from London. They're going to be looking at Nebraska beef, and it's an interesting situation because they're huge fans of Nebraska beef, and so are their customers. Explain to me why.
The Goodman Group has been a growing customer over the last couple of years. They have a very high-end restaurant. They've been voted #1 or #2 steakhouse in the UK over the last couple of years. And they bring in boxed beef, they cut, they have their own dry aging closets in their restaurants. The prices of their steaks are posted on a chalkboard every day according to the market demand and the market prices. But anyway, several years ago, one of the owners and the top manager and executive chef for the group came to Nebraska to not only visit with the plant that they buy all their beef from, but also to understand better why is the beef as good as it is. And after being around for 3 days around the state, going everything from the cow-calf operations to our feedlots to our grain producing where the corn is produced, they said, you know, we need to really bring our managers and our chefs here so that they can understand this also, so they can go back, train their wait staff, so when their customers come in and say, you know, this beef is good, but why is it so different? They'll be able to tell them firsthand. So we're getting the third group now. They come every year. And they're going to see quite a bit of the state where our producers are extremely cordial. They're very inviting. They treat them very, very well. So not only do they see the story, but they understand the culture of who Nebraskans are, which really goes a long way with them.
And finally, we've talked about Chinese investment before. I know there are some representatives coming from that nation here to look at a few investment opportunities. What are some of them?
We have been working with the Paulson Institute, and I won't go into that right at this time, but it's given us an opportunity to work with former Secretary of Treasury Paulson in finding people in China that are looking to do some investments or help that process. And back in January, we met with an individual from one of the organizations that's a government organization that is responsible for that. As a result of that, they're bringing a delegation of agricultural people from the Ministry of Agriculture to the United States. They're going to Washington, Chicago to meet with the Paulson people, and then they're coming to Nebraska to look at not only our investment opportunities, but our agricultural environment. And so we're going to take them around again to show them some of the agricultural facilities we have, and then sit down on roundtable discussions and talk about what potential opportunities we have. One other one we're working with is Bright Foods. Bright Foods is a very large agricultural food company, and they're interested in finding a place in the United States to put a dairy, both the dairy and the processing facility. And so I met with them a couple months ago, and we're hoping that we get them over here to see what the advantages are to be in Nebraska agriculture.
Stan's trip to Turkey took place as citizens were protesting in Istanbul, but Stan says the visits weren't affected or in danger. You can see that portion as well as the rest of our interview with Stan on the Market Journal website. Also from the Nebraska Department of Ag, Director Greg Ibaugh is encouraging farmers with hay, forage, or pasture they wish to sell or lease to use the department's hay hotline. The tool is available year-round, but could be helpful connecting buyers and sellers during a year of drought and short supplies. You can visit the Nebraska Department of Ag website at nda.nebraska.gov for more information. We'll also link to the hay hotline details on the Market Journal homepage. A quick update now to a story we brought you 2 weeks ago. State veterinarian Dennis Hughes says no additional cases of equine infectious anemia have been found in horses that had contact with the initial Cherry County herd. That group remains under quarantine, but the state vet believes the risk of additional horses contracting EIA is minimal. Nebraska irrigates more acres of land than any other state in the country. With primary help from the Ogallala Aquifer, Nebraska has 8.5 million acres under irrigation. The Nebraska Department of Natural Resources says more than 1,200 wells have been registered for irrigation since the end of October. We talked with Bruce Johnson this week to look at the value of center pivots in the state and how they operate at a premium compared to an earlier form of Nebraska irrigation.
It started, a half a century ago with a lot of people moving towards just running furrow type irrigation where the land was level enough to do so. And so we saw that come into play. Along came a new technology that was invented in Nebraska and developed in Nebraska and is really the Nebraska story, and that's center pivot irrigation, which allowed for other kinds of land classes to come in under irrigation.
Why is there this push towards it? Why is it something that Nebraska has really excelled in?
Well, I think it's a number of factors, and one of it is that we just don't have level land like parts of the eastern Corn Belt, which would be conducive to gravity irrigation. But at the same time, our people are understanding the great efficiency gains that come from center pivot type of agriculture. So, we're #1 in the country in terms of irrigation acres, over 8.6 million acres we're approaching, and 80% of that, or 6.5 million acres, are under center pivot irrigation, and growing all the time because of these efficiencies that it provides.
You were looking at if there's a center pivot premium here. Explain to me first off what the premium, what that means, what exactly you're looking for.
Well, other things being equal, if you had a parcel of land that was under gravity irrigation but could not be converted to pivot, you basically have to say, okay, I'll keep it in gravity. But if it has the potential to be converted, then there's a premium because it can be converted. And we find that to be 10 to 15, even 20% of a premium for the possibility of using a pivot technology.
That's on all land?
All land that is really, again, it has to be quality crop land, but where gravity land has the potential to be converted over so that there's not a power line through it to prevent the pivot and all of those things, it will hold its value, but it has to be that, have that potential.
What role does precision play in this when you talk about center pivots?
Yes, precision agriculture and more efficient use of inputs, and down to really specific calibration and so forth. This is huge, and with our newer center pivot technology and moisture monitoring and low pressure systems and so forth, the precision of using limited water is unbelievably significantly better than what would have under conventional gravity.
Is that gap something that you think widens, or is it something that you reach a point where there's diminishing marginal return?
I think certainly if what we say is that there's about 90+% efficiency of water getting to the root zone with pivot systems when used right, versus a little over 50% with conventional furrow or gravity irrigation. That's a huge difference, and it becomes more important as the management of limited water resources gets to be a higher priority, and much more costly too.
We'll link to Bruce's recent Cornhusker Economics article regarding a center pivot premium on the Market Journal website. Jack and Bev Beeson of Wayne have been in the cattle business for more than 60 years and have raised and promoted polled Hereford cattle for 45 years. And as you'll read in the June Nebraska Farmer, they have no intention of slowing down. To be sustainable in the polled Hereford business for more than 6 decades, the Beesons say you have to produce quality cattle, work hard, and be honest with your customers. Their program is based around selling bulls to purebred and commercial customers. You can read more about their operation in June's Nebraska Farmer. Now with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. We have seen a little bit of scattered thunderstorm activity across the state, but it's been very widespread over this last 7 days. And this is starting to be concerning as this trend over the last couple of weeks has showed a broad base of Nebraska has seen below normal precipitation, with the driest conditions really in that area south of Interstate 80 from the southwest all the way through south central Nebraska and a couple pockets of east central Nebraska. The best locations for precipitation in this last 2 weeks have been basically around the metropolitan area of Omaha, right up along the South Dakota-Nebraska border, and then some isolated pockets in the Panhandle. Now, as we go forward in time, the models are increasing their likelihood that we are going to see this ridge reestablish itself and rather firmly for the next 10 to 14 day period at the bare minimum. And of course, with these below normal precipitation tendencies the last couple of weeks, the concern is as we go forward that this will start to become problematic. Hopefully we won't endure some of the same situation that developed last year where once the precipitation shut off, it had shut off pretty much for the remainder of the growing season. and we will get some timely rainfall before at least the corn crop starts to come into pollination as we get toward the middle of the month. So let's see how the models are going to develop during this next week. It does look to be hot, and as we go to the upper air models, what we are noticing is we do have a trough rather weak in the Pacific Northwest, and it's not strong enough to beat this ridge down and progress toward the east, so it's going to ride up over top of this ridge. So we're going to see very warm conditions today. Winds are going to have a southerly component. The humidity levels will be up. There is that chance for scattered thunderstorm activity. Most of it's going to occur during the late afternoon and through the overnight hours into the early morning before it dissipates. And as we get into tomorrow, we'll notice that that trough is lifting up. The ridge is trying to push back into our region. Again, we're going to see very warm temperatures, and the best opportunity for thunderstorm activity will be across extreme northern Nebraska and some isolated spots in the Panhandle. Much lower tendencies as you get toward the Kansas border. As we go into Monday, we'll notice that another trough tries to build into the Pacific Northwest and will bring up some moisture from the Gulf. So again, we have a chance for scattered thunderstorm activity, and some of that might occur in southeastern Nebraska, but it still doesn't look like broad-based coverage. Now, as we go into Tuesday, we'll notice that main energy starts to slide across the Canadian border, so that will push the ridge down slightly, and we'll see a little bit of cooler trend, a few degrees, nothing major. And again, we'll just have a slight chance for thunderstorm activity, but it looks like most areas will remain dry. Now, as we get into Wednesday, that energy starts to lift in over to the Great Lakes, and it's going to dive down and form a trough to the east of us, and that's going to push this ridge from the central Rockies into our region. So we are expecting the coolest temperatures on Wednesday with just a chance of scattered thunderstorm activity in the northeast, and then here comes the warmth. And it looks to be a very warm, dry trend for the remainder of the period. And as we get into Friday, we'll see that high continues to push into our region. So our temperatures look to be rather crispy. The best chance for thunderstorm activity within the first 4 to 5 days of this forecast, and that will be scattered. And then as we look at the 8 to 14-day forecast, we'll see the heat dome in place, the cool conditions in the Pacific Northwest. In terms of precipitation, this is the scary part. Below normal precipitation centered right over Nebraska.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews with Roy Smith, Al Dutcher, Stan Garbitz, and Bruce Johnson are available on the Market Journal website and mobile app as part of the June 21st episode. Next week, Ron Plain will be our marketing analyst. We'll also report from Scotts Bluff and look at how the Panhandle is dealing with another year of drought. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
America's export of soybeans helps the U.S. maintain a positive agricultural trade balance. Nebraska contributes half of its soybeans for export. The protein and oil content in soybeans enhance the growing demand for higher protein diets. The Nebraska Soybean Board promotes research to develop new soybean varieties with higher protein and oil content for major agricultural markets. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.